Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Trisha Fountain. I am the managing director for Ross Executive Education, Michigan Ross Executive Education's open enrollment and digital programs, where we work with senior leaders like you to advance careers, learn the latest research that is changing and advancing the business world. So we're really grateful to have you here. Learning alongside us today. I'm joined by my colleague. We'll make some introductions of everybody on the screen as we go through the next few minutes of the webinar. But I want to just give a special shout out to my colleague, Peter Sims, who is my colleague on the open enrollment and digital team. He is the portfolio director for our in-person programs, and we'll be talking about very briefly just introducing you to one today. So wanted to make sure you know that he is a resource, and we'll make sure to get you his contact information if you have any questions or any needs that we can assist you with in your learning and development journey. So today we are going to walk through this webinar, just a couple of details and housekeeping items before I turn it over to our maestro. The webinar will be recorded and shared, so just know that if you need to leave early or if you miss a section, we will make sure that comes to you in your inbox via the email that you registered for this webinar with. A couple of just notes on how to interact throughout the webinar. All attendees are muted and the chat function is disabled, but we are using the Q&A function for this webinar. So we ask that you, throughout, anytime you have a question, please feel free to go ahead and throw that in the Q&A. When you submit those questions, only the panelists and hosts will be able to see them, and we'll make sure to get those questions answered and addressed throughout the webinar. And in particular, at the end, we'll hold space and time so that you can engage a little bit more thoroughly in a question and answer period. But please, anytime, throw those in the chat and we'll make sure to get those answered. That function is at the bottom of your Zoom screen in the toolbar, and it's just labeled Q&A, rightly so. So now I'd love to introduce you to a couple of new programs that we have launching, actually just one new program that we have launching in April of this year. So it's a couple of months out. Really excited to align the content that you'll be hearing about today and coming from the man, the myth, the legend that you'll be hearing from today in the marketing and culture space. We have a program called the Business of Culture. But I won't read you the words on this slide, but just know that we are really excited to expand our offerings to the West Coast. We'll be launching a new course in Los Angeles, and this is building momentum. And what we're hearing from our clients and many of our attendees to have more broad reach in terms of region and availability of where we go in person. So a great opportunity for, instead of coming to Michigan in April, to have a little bit of warmth, sunshine, and access to beach in April at our Ross West location in Los Angeles. And the course is focused on one of the hot topics that we've been hearing from many of our participants and many of the people that we work with, of how culture is impacting the way that we do business, both internally and externally. You'll hear Dr. Marcus Collins talking about more about that in today's session. And the course takes a deep dive into his research and his practice based in this field. So with no further ado, I will introduce you to Dr. Marcus Collins, who we are so grateful to have as a colleague. Marcus is an award-winning marketer, so that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, a professor of marketing here at Michigan Ross, and most recently, a best-selling author of the book For the Culture, from which he draws a lot of his writing and his research into the course and into the content that you'll be hearing today. So he's also the faculty director of the course I just mentioned. Lots of awards that I won't read you the laundry list of awards that he's received, but I wanted to highlight one which we're really proud of and we want to brag about for him, but also is really relevant for just kind of understanding his place and where his work and research is making an impact in the business world. Just want to celebrate that he was the recent recipient of the Thinkers 50 Radar Distinguished Achievement Award, and that was for the idea that's most likely to shape the future of business management and the work that he's doing in this culture space. We are so honored to work alongside not only an incredible thought leader in the space, transforming the way businesses engage and think about internal and external cultural alignment, but also just a good human being. So really grateful to have him. With no further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Marcus Collins.
Trisha, thank you so much. The honor is all mine. Good night. I don't know if I can live up to that introduction, but I am very, very grateful for it. And so excited to have you all with us today, talking about a space that I think is not only worthy of our attention, but I think it is an obligation for us as business leaders to understand it. And that is culture. And what is culture after all, right? Culture is what I would argue the most powerful external force on human behavior. It's the most influential external force on human behavior. And you hear that and go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, culture influences us. But if you ask 5 people to define culture, you get 55 different answers. And that's a problem. Because if we can't define a thing concretely, how do we ever fully leverage its power? If we can't articulate a thing concretely or saliently, it makes it almost impossible for us to leverage, to harness this sway that is culture. Therefore, it's incumbent upon us as business leaders, particularly marketers, but I would say everyone inside the organization to understand culture and be able to leverage its power in an effort to get people to move, whether you're a marketer putting products in the world to get people to consume, whether you're a manager trying to catalyze or inspire your team to move, or you're in the C suite trying to get the organization to move towards a destination that's going to lead to business success. And therefore, we carved out some time today to talk about culture. And we have with us a very distinguished panel. And often people say that, like, all right, we have a distinguished panel, but let me tell you, we have a really, really distinguished panel. And I am fortunate enough to call these people my friends. That's a little flex, I admit, but I'm going to keep it real. I'm very excited about this. So if you would please help me welcome to the stage, we have the global head of business marketing at TikTok, Sophia Hernandez. We have with us the chief marketing officer of Yum Brands, Ken Munch, and also the chief growth officer at Art Basel, Haley Romer. Friends, hello, hello. Welcome to the University of Michigan Ross School of Business. And thank you all for being with us today. How's it going?
Great. Thanks for having us, Marcus.
Of
Awesome.
course. Of course. I mean, listen, you all are a wealth of knowledge, an unbelievable repository of seasoned experience that we really want to tap in today. So what I'm going to ask you to do is sort of put on your professorial hat while you're with us. And as I ask you these questions, as we navigate this space of culture, I really want you to take us like behind the scenes. Like we want to get an understanding of sort of the mechanisms of your work in culture, how you think about it, how you leverage the power of culture, and how you get your teams to operate within it. That sound like a good plan? Cool.
It's great.
Yes. Awesome. You know, I tell my students all the time, I go, thumbs up. If you're with me, thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Let's do it.
There we go. Thumbs up. There it is. Cool. Awesome. All right. So let's get started. And Ken, we're gonna start it with you just to kind of get like level set us here. We'll kick it off with you. So you oversee a portfolio of many brands with Yum, right? From Taco Bell to Pizza Hut to KFC. And all these brands have had a role and have a role in the cultural zeitgeist, some longer than others. Think about the legacy of some brands. How do you think about culture in regards to how these brands go to market? How do you think about culture with regards to how you connect with consumers and ultimately get them to move?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invite. Really exciting to be here and to talk to you, of course. Look, I think we see we have a system that at Yum called RED, relevance, ease, distinctiveness, and that's basically the three foundations of marketing, if you will, and building a brand. The most important and the most exciting, the most profound, as you just mentioned, is the relevance part, and specifically within that, cultural relevance is what we focus on. Now, cultural relevance, we look at three different levels. We look at it at a giant cultural relevance level globally, understand where the world is headed, what consumers care about. This is stuff like, healthier eating habits and more sustainability. That's like big, giant C. Then there's this middle C where we look at the category that we're in, which is fast food or food, by country. And we say, okay, what's the cultural code or what's the cultural zeitgeist around food or fast food or restaurants in Germany or in South Africa or in Mexico? And then we adapt the brand and we we ensure that we are on or ahead of that cultural thing. And then finally, we have a very small C at the bottom, which is, how do we leverage the small little puffs of culture? How do we partner with the right, sports star? How do we tap into the right, little trend? But that middle C is probably the most interesting, which is the trickiest part, is sort of cracking that cultural code by category, by country, and ensuring you're on it as a brand.
So I love that, because what it does is it sort of dimensionalizes this big amorphous thing that we know as culture, and think about it at a macro level, think about it at a more micro level. But do you think about sort of the time horizons? Do they change? So for instance, the macro, is that faster or slower than the micro that are more sort of fleeting, if you will?
Yeah. Certainly. I think it's interesting. I think those macros by and large take a very long time to change and to build and to have an impact.
Yeah.
Sustainability is a hot topic. Healthier eating is a hot topic, but these aren't things that if you focus on 100% entirely, you're going to get incredible returns on, because they take time to build. And it takes time to get everything in place, and it takes time to get consumers excited about, a big sort of shift like that. And then that for me is, we're talking more along the decade path, right?
Yeah.
And then that middle C is more around the 5-year mark, which is okay. So maybe fast food here in the 90s was all about cheap, easy gut fill. It certainly changed with millennials, and it became sort of like a cooler, Instagrammable kind of thing. And it's changed again with Gen Z. And I would say there's a shift every few years on that, little slight shifts or faster shifts. And then of course the small C changes on a daily basis, and you'll lose your mind trying to follow that one. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, Grant McCracken, who's a cultural anthropologist, talks about this as fast culture and slow culture.
Oh, there you
And
go.
I think that, so he talks about it at the speed at which it happens, but I love the layer you put on that in the level at which it happens, that time and its altitude are functions of each other. So if you're a marketer trying to say, let's tap into culture, you could go, well, first of all, whose culture
Yeah.
starting?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What convinces expectations for what group of people? But then in what context? Are we talking about this at a national level, kind of what the culture of a group of people is? Talk about the categorical level, the cultural conventions and expectations of food, for instance, or
Yep.
sneakers, or water, or whatever the case may be. And then what are sort of the day-to-day conventions and expectations that are manifested through their artifacts, their behaviors, and their language? And I think that finding the texture there helps us operationalize it. And I think about the work you do, Sophia, and TikTok. I mean, one would argue that that fast culture, at the micro level, that's happening every second on TikTok. And I imagine a lot of your job is helping brands understand it and navigate it. Is that fair to say?
That is the entirety of my job, Marcus, is to really partner with people like Ken and his teams and his agency partners to help them understand how to, in a very natural and authentic way, be a part of the culture that's happening on TikTok.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. I like that, natural and authentic. It's I think about natural, organic. It's without being manufactured, just sort of as being, you find the place in the cultural zeitgeist where you have license or authority to do that. How do you help brands navigate that? How do you help brands be authentic, which sounds inauthentic to ask that question? It's how do you just be? But how do you help brands understand who they are so that they can participate in this one would argue, volatile sort of cultural changes that happen at the micro level where fast culture is being negotiated and constructed?
Yeah. So at a high level, we tell brands that we understand they need to think like marketers, but we ask them to act like creators. So think like marketers, act like creators. And the reason I say that is because TikTok is about 4 years old, and what we put out was a tool for the community to really take into their own hands and express themselves, right? And because they took it and it was born of the community, it became this place where people go and they feel like they're part of something that they connect with, right? And, when you think about all of the different communities that exist on this platform, there's everything from people who like potatoes, and that's potato talk, to people who are into witches, there's witch talk, to people who are into watching really dirty things get really clean, clean talk. So there's a space for everyone, right? And for a long time, and Ken, please challenge me on this, but for a long time, we as marketers have been, building very safe brand guideline books. We've been adhering to those kind of rules year after year after year. And, as of the last 2 decades, our marketing became very formulaic in a lot of ways. When you think about the Instagram and Facebook and, banners and everything we started doing was very prescriptive. It should be this length. It should have this in the first 6 seconds. And we knew what would perform. And what happened when TikTok came into the scene is it meaning the community, essentially asked marketers to come to this space in a much more real way. It's asking marketers and brands to be creative again. And that's something I think that we leaned very into the science over the last 2 decades and maybe lost a little bit of touch with the art. And so I think we've brought the art back in, and Ken does a really good job at it, actually, he and his teams. And it requires being a part of the community. So not just as marketers being students of culture, but practitioners of culture. You have to be in there. You have to see what it's about, and you have to have conversations that are relevant to your brand. If you don't belong there, you shouldn't be opening your mouth, basically.
Yeah,
Does that sound right?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, there's no quicker way to kill your brand than to have a formula. Truly, there's a framework that we follow, and it's certainly what you laid out, which is you got to hire the right people. Everybody that we go after internally and externally is people that are dialed into culture. Among the first questions that we ask is, what are you reading? What are you watching? Who are you listening to? What's happening in the world? And once you have that group of people internally that are connected, you sort of get it, versus maybe at a more traditional organization where you have a bunch of traditional marketers. That's a challenge. It's a really big challenge for them to make sense of a world like TikTok, where you have to be fully and totally authentic, open, a little messier, truly authentic and real with your brand. We've done some wild things over the last few years on social media. Some of them work, some of them don't. But what we've noticed is when you're authentic, you feel the love, and that's really what it's all about.
I like that. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry,
Go ahead, Sophia.
I
Go.
was
So
just
you
gonna
go.
say, I'll add in, the word authentic is really easy to say. It's very
Yeah.
hard to practice for most brands. For legal reasons, creative bravery is required. It is very difficult for a brand who has many stakeholders, right, to figure out what it means to actually go out into the world authentically.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention, it's hard to be authentic if you don't know who you are, right? What's the Lauryn Hill line? How you going to win if you ain't right within? If you don't know who you are, it becomes really difficult to sort of be your authentic self. And so I like that phrase, the phraseology you used there, Sophia, like be a marketer, but act like a creator. And so I think it's like a perfect segue for Haley, because Haley has been on like the creative side, the creator side, i.e., the cultural producer side, her entire career, basically, right? At The Atlantic and now at Art Basel, you have been a part of the stewardship of cultural production, right? Of the people who produce the beliefs and ideologies that recommend the artifacts, the behaviors and language that become adopted into the zeitgeist, that become negotiated and constructed at the fast level, be it TikTok, or at the macro level, be it just our normal discourse. So, Haley, as a cultural producer or steward of cultural production, are you intentionally thinking about how are we impacting culture, or is it just sort of what you do? Is it like, oh, water is wet, so we're just wet? Talk to us.
Oh my gosh, I don't know. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and what an honor to be in such great company. Um, I don't know if you're gonna like my answer, but I've just been kind of jotting down notes, and Ken and Sophia are really kind of inspiring me to think about a lot of different things. But the first thing I want to start with is, you call out, like, both in media. I have a background in media now at Art Basel, being a sort of culture producer. And the funny thing is, I don't know if I should say this out loud because
Please do.
but so much of what happens on, let's call it, the cultural production side, um, is not intentional.
Hmm.
It happens, I would say, like, in the case of having been at the Atlantic, which is one of the sort of greatest platforms for big ideas that's ever existed, and just surfacing big ideas and provocation. And actually, quite frankly, likewise, so is Art Basel. I mean, Art Basel is a platform that elevates creativity and kind of powers the world of art. It is not necessarily with specific intention that we say, this is how we're going to do that. What happens is, I think, through kind of through an intentional curation, you get this non-scientific, incredible ability to sort of surface the things that, again, a lot of what happens is not intentional or scientific because it's not on the marketing side. But when you sort of see big ideas that resonate, or you kind of watch the magnetism of an idea take off, or you see that happening, that is the thing. So you started out, Marcus, just talking about how can you step into culture and define, if it's not defined, how can you impact culture if you don't understand the thing that you're impacting? My first instinct is, well, on the one hand, there is this sort of je ne sais quoi thing that exists about people who happen to be transformative or magnetic, or can help move the needle on conversations or ideas, or just, sort of art generally. On the other hand, the funny thing about this is that I've joined Art Basel in part to put some intentionality to this incredible cultural force we are as a brand, really helping to think more strategically about who we serve and why, so that what we do doesn't continue to kind of happen, let's say, by accident, but that we can, very specifically, and I think more deeply, engage our community and communities in a way that kind of serve people better. So
Yeah.
it's like it's a different lens, and I spend so much time working with marketers. I'm so inspired by the notion of thinking how you can kind of tap into the original DNA of a brand, of a person, of a thing, and extrapolate that such that it resonates with other people. I love that. I'm doing that, all the time. I did it the other day with somebody. I said, I understand you're built on art. I understand you've worked with Art Basel. I understand you want to continue to do something, but let's just go back to the very beginning. What is the actual thing that makes you different? And once you bring somebody back to that, you're like, boom. I see. Okay. So what if we take that thread and somehow connect it somewhere else? So I guess what I'm saying is a lot of what happens in terms of cultural production is unintentional.
Yeah.
Sort of through association and big ideas. So I've been fortunate enough to surround myself with brilliant people with big ideas that manifest in journalism or art. But when you can really intentionally layer onto it the ability to think strategically, and kind of the desire to extrapolate that je ne sais quoi thing, it can be magical.
So this is super powerful. And I've never thought about it this way until you just said that. And I think this is like really great. Because what I hear you saying is that when it comes to the actual production of culture, right? The actual the art, the literature, film, television, brands and branded products, right? These things that we do that express an ideology, a belief, that the community, a group of people use as a way to express their own identity, that there isn't a ton of intentionality there. They are just points of view about the world. They are ideas that exist within us that we have to get out, right? Like that's what I'm hearing. So when Sophia says you got to be a marketer, but think like a content creator, it's almost like you got to be a marketer, but you have to go forward based on how you see the world, the ideas that are expressions of who you are. Now,
I
the
think
marketer part becomes the invitation for people to be a part of that. So like the
that
intentionality on who we're inviting, that's the who are we? How do we see the world? Who are we for? The marketing, the going to market with our ideas are ways by which we invite people to be a part of it.
well
But the
said.
production part is who we are and how we see the world. Does like so Sophia, Ken, Haley, does that do you feel something when you hear that? Like again, when Haley said that, it never dawned on me that those two things interact that way. Because I would often say to marketers that if you want to be a part of culture, you have three choices. And my friend Eric Holtman uses this analogy. He says you can drive it, right? That is, you can lead it, right? And you lead it by contributing to the artifacts, behaviors, the language, right? That contribute to the conventions that make up people's culture. Or you can ride shotgun. That is, you could participate in it. That there are a set of beliefs and artifacts, behaviors, and language that already exist, and you are engaging in it. Therefore, your marketing communication, your behaviors, your kinetics are contributing to what already exists. Or you could suck tailpipe. And that's the worst thing to do, right? That's just following. It's just it's our version of the thing, like, and that's the wackest. But this idea of acting like a marketer, being a marketer, but acting like a creator, is that we have a point of view on the world, and we are bringing our point of view to market to invite other people to engage in it, and that is leading culture. That is contributing to culture by contributing new beliefs, new artifacts, behaviors, and language. Am I barking up the wrong tree here? Talk to me. What are you feeling? I see some head nods. I see Ken thinking. Ken's a big thinker.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think you're definitely right. I think maybe it's as simple as, and we call it like the role in culture, and your role in culture is a very active role with a very strong point of view, with a very, very clear identity. And your role in culture is sort of the critical piece in it, at least the way I think about it. We're at Taco Bell, we sort of think of ourselves as a cultural rebel. And so what we're looking for is other like-minded cultural rebels that are there to, mess around with things and for the betterment of the world, for a sort of a creative disruption of things, and that's our role. And so once you have that role clear, then you're creating culture, you're participating in culture, you're probably doing both of those things. But
I guess that's the great part, is that when you are just being, to Sophia's point about just being authentic, is that, look, we know who we are, and we're just rebels. It's just who we are. We are contrary, we're reverent just by nature. It's just who we are. So we go to market just being who we are. Ergo, being a marketer but acting like a creator is just part and parcel of who we are. Right. And we strategically go to market with some intentionality so that we can invite more people who are like us to engage in culture the way that we do.
So I guess I agree with that. I'd push it a little, because what we're seeing in culture and the way people are behaving is they don't necessarily want to fit in a box anymore, right? And I think as marketers, like we're safe in that box. Like we've defined ourselves as a rebel and this is where we play. But what I've seen happen, especially on TikTok, is brands start to experiment with other personalities or spaces, right? And that's okay. I think it's less okay for us internally at our organizations as marketers to say like, well, we're a rebel, but what if we really want to own like food education, or I don't know, Ken, I'm making this up, but is there another space that you want to play? Everyone's open to that. Like they're not looking for brands to be one thing. They actually want brands to show up in the space authentically, but that doesn't mean just as one person.
That's interesting. So this is where, and I completely agree with you. I think the idea that a person is sort of got a single face is wrong, right? And so therefore a brand shouldn't. The problem is the way that we believe marketing works is by creating a distinctive brand that essentially creates salience in a consumer's mind. And if that brand changes too often, you lose the distinctiveness. If Taco Bell is a cultural rebel one day, and then the next day is sort of like a, I don't know, archetype of a caretaker, you sort of lose the essence of the brand, and distinctiveness is brought down. And when distinctiveness comes down, salience comes down. You get less attribution to the thing that you were doing, and so you don't stand out. So our media dollars aren't as effective, basically. But the way that we think about it, because like the food education grade is a great example. What we say, there's nothing out of bounds for us. We just have to do it. We just have to do it as a rebel. So let's do food education, but let's do it as a rebel. And then so we do super cool sustainability things or stuff that's really good for the world, but we do it as a rebel. And so it always, you're always being, yes, I guess it is you single-minded kind of one face of the brand, but on the good side, we call it a constructive rebel.
But I see that. I mean, I just kind of going like threading the needle that Haley started us on. I see that, and that's what a creator does. That's what a cultural producer does. Like, I see the world a certain way, so I'm going to approach this genre or this context in my own way. I can still play in it, but I'm doing a way that's me. We've seen Jay-Z do hardcore hip hop. We've seen Jay-Z do R&B stuff. We've seen him do rock stuff as well, but he always does it Jay-Z. And that we'll say is his authentic self. He shows up as himself, but it's always his point of view on whatever the context is. And he does it authentically. And he goes to market in such a way that invites other people to be a part of it. So there is intentionality while being just being.
So I mean, I agree. It's in the how, right? And so the way that you show up as a rebel can change. It can fluctuate depending on where you are, what medium you're in, whether it's in the store, whether it's on TikTok, etc. And I think that's why the think like marketer, act like creators thing is so strong, because creators want to bring their ideas to life in creative ways, period. And they want to connect with people. And I think as marketers, if we can really lean into creative bravery, and again, Ken, I will give you guys props because I think you do this very well. If we can lean into creative bravery, then it allows us to explore different ways to do that. I'll give one example. So Procter and Gamble, when they talk about beauty, when they talk about any kind of consumer packaged goods, they have a formula, right? They're going to show a before, they're going to show a beautiful after, and in between they're going to show the formula, right? Like what creates the before and after. And when they talk about fem care, it is very kind of practical, in a practical way. What they did on TikTok was they partnered with this African-American comedian, and the way that she brought the message to life of absorbency was this skit with her boyfriend. So here you have like something that's very taboo to talk about typically with a significant other, and he's part of this. It's humorous. We're not seeing a formula. We're not seeing a before and after. And this was like expansion for them, and it did so well because people love to see realness from brands. Go ahead.
That distillation actually speaks exactly to what Ken was talking about. Like, you thought about what the culture is nationally, what's acceptable, what the conventions and expectations are nationally when it comes to fem care. Look at the category in particular. What are the tropes? What are the expectations? What are acceptable? What is normally done in fem care? And then use the cultural, the micro-culture sort of fast cultural things, the context in which we operate day to day, to think about the category and subvert it, right? This is like a to me, identifying the mechanisms of how brands look at what's going on in the world, how we could be a part of it, and how we can leverage what is normal for people like us, considering who us is, to drive relevancy and salience in our mind? Like what cognitive real estate we want to own in their mind in an effort to get people to adopt behavior?
I think I want to kind of build on, the example of, let's say, Jay-Z being himself in various contexts. And likewise, as you were saying, Ken, there are so many sort of, let's say, overarching themes that kind of sit throughout our through lines, that exist where you sort of wonder where you tap into this, where specifically your brand would tap into it. And, one thing I think that is often overlooked because brands will sort of scrutinize themselves in this way, like to no end, is like, do we belong here? Da, 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 da. You do have to ask yourself if you belong somewhere, but don't discount the fact that no individual is always and only one way. And it's not true that only one thing is important to an individual. And it's not true that one would only ever want one thing from an individual. That is to say, like, don't limit yourself based on prior resonance that you've had, or a sort of shifting zeitgeist and saying, okay, well, this is where we played and this is where we were, this is the thing that we did. I think it's important that individuals see brands and see cultural influence as a living, breathing thing that changes and that adapts over time. And I'm not saying you just jump into something because everybody's doing that. That is not what I mean to say.
Yeah.
But what I mean to say is, like, don't be afraid to think that you should be creating other things. I mean, you have a lot more sort of permission if you do it right. And it's like, if you just kind of, the analog to that would be with just any individual human being. People have different ideas. They change their mind over time. When it works, like, as you sort of change yourself, or like you go from teenager to adult and from, young adult to middle age. I know nothing about that. But, as you kind of adapt and evolve as a human, I think bringing along the things that always made you, but showcasing them in new ways that, that kind of speak about you in a new way, or speak to people in a way that they can now hear it, is important. So I would almost liken a brand to a person in that way. It's like, the person who sort of says, like, sets out is like, I'm going to be cool, is probably not necessarily the coolest person. But the person who's always sort of stood out as somebody who, can sort of evoke provocation in an interesting way, or show up in new and interesting spaces, creates that kind of wonder and then permission to exist in new ways. So I'm not entirely sure what I'm saying, but I'm just sort of building on a couple of things.
I mean, the way I see that is that you're speaking of the intersectionality that makes up who we are as individuals. And as we anthropomorphize brands, we expect a sense of, or we give brands permission to be intersectional as well. And over time, the way in which they show up should evolve because culture is constantly evolving. And the brands, just like the people who are willing to provoke because their point of view is unique and distinctive to who they are, that they are the ones that create the catalysts that get us entering the discourse that help us negotiate and construct meaning.
That's right.
And ultimately move culture forward.
And interrogate things, right? So it's not just provoke, but it's like, when you kind of sit down and question something and start to explore it in different ways. I think that can help drive resonance, cultural resonance as well.
And so we've been talking about culture from a consumption lens, right? But we as we say, brands are representative of something, and they are stewarded by groups of people. So how do we get organizational culture to see the world in the way you all have so brilliantly framed it, so that the organization acts in concert, right? So, Ken, you're chief marketing officer, you're overseeing many brands that have many teams. How do you get the organization to say, oh, okay, red, relevance, ease, distinctiveness, got it, on board? Like, I know you're not like cracking a whip to get them, in line. So how do you inspire social cohesion around the culture that you want Yum brand to manifest?
Look, I mean, you have to have a success internally. If you're in an organization and you want to make change, the quickest way is to find a little pocket and have a little bit of wild success, and then decode it for the rest of the organization and have them want what you want. So that's the practical question. You know, we helped crack Taco Bell back in 2011, and everybody gets excited and it's like, wait, how'd you do that? And we break it down, then everybody jumps in and goes, okay, I want some of that. That's the best and easiest way to get a large organization excited. But the other obvious ones are, you have to inspire the organization to be not risk averse, but risk hungry. And I know it sounds cliche, but you got to take chances. You just have to, and you got to be comfortable with making a mistake sometimes. There was a creative that I used to love that he said marketing and branding is like a tennis court and a tennis championship. If you lob that ball down the middle, the crowd doesn't do anything. Nobody really cares. But it's when you whack that ball super fast and it lands right on the line that everybody goes crazy. So the organization has to understand that what you're shooting for with your media dollars is to land right on that line. And sometimes you're going to go over. But that for me is where you distinguish a good organization from a great organization. Is like, okay, I'm comfortable with that. And therefore you automatically start looking for where is that line in culture and how do I play up to that line? And suddenly everybody's focused on culture.
Yeah. So you identify case studies that are representative, exemplary of where we want to be and what we want to do, get people excited about that. And then you decode sort of how we got there as a way of saying, like, you know, this isn't a formula, but it's the ethos of this that got us there, i.e. creative bravery, i.e. taking risk, i.e. understanding that, or at least believing that the good stuff happens when we're toeing the line, when it's really, really close to being out of bounds, and having enough courage to navigate that nuance.
100%, 100%. And you also can invite Marcus Collins to speak at your company, and that helps accelerate the change.
So Sophia, you know, so I would love your take on this, because what Ken is talking about here is about like a shared belief, a shared ideology, and we have some exemplary case study to help keep ourselves plumb, right? To be a North Star. And really, what we know of culture is that that's sort of the underpinning sort of functions of culture: identity, belief, ideology, that are then expressed or manifested through conventions like artifacts, behaviors, and language. But when it comes to tech, immediately, I know one of the first questions you get are, what are the best practices? What are the best practices on TikTok? How do I make sure that my TikToks do X, Y, and Z and go viral? How do you get your clients to understand that it's not about these tactics, but it's about this ethos, the spirit, the shared ideology and belief that gets your company activating in this place where culture is facilitated in a way that allows them to benefit from the power of culture?
I mean, yeah, what's funny is it's not too different than what Ken just said. We had a few early adopters, few brands that were really leaning into the platform in 2020 and 2021. And we basically took those successes and showcased them and created a little excitement and honestly a little FOMO with other brands, and really helped them see how it impacted these brands. And I'll give you one example. So everyone, I'm sure, knows Corey Marchesotto over at e.l.f. Cosmetics. She was an early adopter, and I mean, her sales are through the roof over the last 3 years. She very openly publishes this, and she is a huge proponent of TikTok. And she says that there are times where they'll have a spike in sales of a product that is not a new product. It's a legacy product, 10 years old. And to see that level of spike, they automatically say something's happening on TikTok creating this. So I think, you know, Ken's spot on. You have to demonstrate it. So you have to find that small pocket where you can get those case studies and wins, and then you celebrate it, right? You demonstrate it and then you celebrate it. And when you celebrate it, it's, you know, people start to get excited about that idea. And they start to feel a deeper connection to that mission and want to embody it.
Now I can see marketers. Hold on, I'm about to get you, Haley, just for a moment. I can see marketers being like, yeah, totally. Like, give me the framework. Give me the framework. Show me the promised land and give me the framework to get there and I'll follow it. But Haley, you're dealing with creatives. You deal with people who are like, oh, if that's where you want me to go, I am definitely not going there. So
Well, you know what?
how
So
do you,
this is interesting because like using TikTok as an example of like how a brand would think about showing up there. Like Corey is brilliant. The way she's leveraged TikTok has been brilliant, and the way TikTok just leverages her product, right? So some of it happens organically without, being intentional, and some of it, of course, is because she very much understands the community there and how to leverage the platform. We at Art Basel are like, okay, should we be on TikTok? I'm going to come back to one of the first questions. We are not currently. So just for those who are unaware.
Well, the answer is yes, by the way.
So in trying to imagine it, I'm going to come back to a question that you asked at the onset of this conversation, Marcus, which is whose culture? That is a really important question for us because Art Basel is a very global brand. We have fairs on, we've got 4 fairs around the world. We have a fair in Hong Kong. We have 2 in Europe, and 1 in Miami Beach. Most Americans know Art Basel as just being in Miami, and I frequently get the question, are you going to Basel? And what they mean is Miami, and Basel is a city in Switzerland. So I sort of laugh about that. But the point is, if we're going to be on TikTok, who are we trying to be for on TikTok? Is it our core audience, or like the world's, sort of utmost art collectors on TikTok? And do they want to see what Art Basel has to offer in that space? Or are we trying to bring new people to the fairs? If so, which new people? If so, on which continent? If so, to do what? What is it we want to get them to do? Is it simply to engage with the brand? And if so, right, like then who, what, where, when, why, how? So it is a very kind of active conversation where, again, so much of the force that is Art Basel as this platform that elevates collective creativity has been unintentional. But as we start to put intentionality behind it, we have to ask ourselves these very real questions about for who, and why, and then where. So Sophia, sure, we want to be there. What is the interesting way in which we would show up? How do we add value to your platform? I mean, anybody can come on there and just showcase art. That's not what we need to do. How do we stand out? How do we do the thing? How do we be the cultural force that we are, and for whom, in a way that makes sense on that platform? So it's a very real thing that we're kind of wrestling with in real time. And I think it is important for, individuals and marketers and brands to put that frame on and ask that question.
But how do you get your organization on board for that? I mean, like that sounds terribly complicated, right? If we take Ken's idea of like the macro level down to the micro level, it becomes really complicated when you're thinking about a global brand where there are many cultural characteristics at the macro level and what it means to the category and what's going on a day-to-day basis with these folks. Like, how do you get the organization to get on board with here's the intentional way forward? Essentially, crack the code for us, Haley. Like, help us out here.
I wish I had call me back in a few months and I'll let you know if it happened. But what I would say, actually, honestly, the best approach to anything is not sort of telling, but it's asking. I have found the greatest success comes through asking people questions. If you start to give them answers, they don't want to hear it. People can receive it as being prescriptive or a sort of, they put up their defense mechanism. Don't ever tell anybody what you think they should know. Ask them, maybe why not? And the answers really sort of reveal themselves. So it is all about, in my mind, asking the right questions. And people can find their way. Now, I don't know if there's a necessary science behind that. I'll tell you, I went to school to be a journalist. I'm just a deeply curious person who asks a lot of questions, and I let everybody know that in advance. But for me, I think it's less about telling, because people really think they know what they know already, and it's more about asking.
Yeah. Kind of playing into the spirit of curiosity. And as people start to talk, they begin to reveal their biases, but also they start to internally start to interrogate their own sort of points of view, which I think is strong. Okay, so I know we're winding up on time, and we got questions coming in. I'm gonna try to distill some of these questions a little bit because I think that they complement each other in many ways. So, and I'll pose this to all three of you. As we think about the power of culture, I mean, we've talked about just how powerful it is within our organizations, how it impacts consumption, which is super important because we're all in some commercial spaces. What are the things that you ask yourself as a marketer, as a business leader on a day-to-day basis as you're navigating consumer culture, organizational culture, and the role you play in society? As a leader, as a human being, as a mother, as a father, as a person of color, as a husband, like you all are, as yourself, human beings. You are intersectional. You're not just leaders, but you have you hyphenated hats that you wear. How are you making these decisions for consumers, for your organization, and for yourself?
I can kick off.
Please do.
So I got into the business because I'm passionate about change. And I remember as a consumer growing up with things that I just did not connect with. So what I'm always challenging myself with, whether it's in life or at work, and especially at work, is am I disrupting the rooms of sameness? That is very important. Whether it's how we're showing up creatively to how we're disrupting the way, the industry has told us things should be, to the way we're building teams, to, the way I operate as an executive, as a mother, as a leader. So I'm always challenging myself to question what we've been told is the way and try to find new paths.
I love that. I love that. Question the dominant logic. There's a scholar here named C.K. Prahalad, who passed, but brilliant scholar who talked about challenging the dominant logic, because on the other side of the dominant logic is where innovation is, where creativity is, and that's where disruption lives as well. Ken, Haley, I invite you to sort of weigh in on that one too.
Yeah, I love that answer. I think that's entirely right, and I think that's what gets a lot of my team excited is, are we disrupting stuff? And that's really, I think, where the exciting stuff happens in culture. When you're just sort of following along, it's awfully boring. It's awfully boring for people that are watching, and it's awfully boring for people that are working on it too, if you're just following the road. So that's certainly a big thing. Another thing I think that is true across the board, is this going to result in something good eventually? Are we going down the right path? Is this going to be beneficial to people, humanity, society, somehow, somewhere, someplace? And I think anybody that's in business at some point is going to be asking themselves that question, especially today. And so, yes, culture, the big C culture, is headed down that path. I think that there's that long arc of history which bends to the good and to change. And are you part of that, or are you not? And so that's the big question, I think, that's on everybody's mind. And I think the deep down inside is what everybody wants to achieve.
Yeah, there's some morality to this beyond just commercial exchange. Yeah. Haley, what's your take?
Mine's probably a lot more simple. Of course, Sophie and Ken have great questions. But mine, I would simply put as why. I ask that question, of my children. So Sophia, you mentioned you're a mother. I've got 2 children as well. I'm constantly asking them why. And I think just that simple word, can often sort of give pause and make people just rethink what it is they're doing. And, I joined this organization about 5 months ago. And I'm learning, I'm listening, and of course asking tons of questions, but the thing I would come back to is why. And it's very funny how challenging it can be to answer that question when you ask again and again and again. And what it does is, just I think it illuminates for people that they themselves might want to question what it is they believe or are talking about.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to the idea about curiosity. Why is the perfect question to spark curiosity? Why are those things? You go, let me think that thing through. So look, we have tons of questions that I'm not going to get to, and I'm so sorry for those who are joining. I told the panel when we started, I'm going to be selfish because I want to learn from your brilliance. So I know I hogged up a lot of time, but I do want to ask one last question of you all, just a speed round question before we let you go. What's the best advice that you'd give to the business leaders who are attending this panel right now that are curious, that understand that culture is important, but don't know how to get started? What's the advice you give them? Like, hey, here's how to get on first base. If you get there, because first base is always the hardest, get on first base. Here's how you get started. What advice do you give them?
Personally, I think it starts with, are you hiring the right people? Are you hiring young people that are dialed in, or are you hiring, it doesn't matter with age, are you hiring those type of people? And it really, it's a black and white. Once you start looking at it and you start interviewing people, you're like, oh, you get it, you're connected, you can feel it. And that's where you start. The more you have of those people in the organization, the more your organization is going to change. Just inertia, just, I don't know, physics. And so that's maybe the secret way into it, I suppose.
Yeah, so we start with hiring for proximity. I like that. Sophia, how about you?
First of all, 1000% to what Ken just said. People are so important to all of this. I guess I'll add, especially for younger marketers, understand the impact you're going to have to the bottom line. I think marketers in early ages aren't thinking about their impact to the business as much as they should be. It kind of tends to lean more creative. And so you can do brilliant things if you know how you're going to tell the story about how you helped profitability.
Yeah, that's the thing, like a marketer side. Haley, talk to us.
Oh my gosh. So many things. Yes, yes, what they said. Also, I guess maybe something that's just sort of top of mind, two things, but they go hand in hand. One is, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. I think we cannot underestimate the importance of remembering that. And that kind of goes hand in hand with know your audience. I don't mean that broadly as a marketer, but I think as an individual, as you look at an organization, I have found it's just generally true. People think of things through the lens of themselves. So really understand what it is that the person you're speaking to is thinking about, what they're trying to get out of the conversation as much as you can, as you sort of speak or solicit advice or whatever it is you're doing. Just really try to understand who you're speaking to and with as you do that.
Amen. Ken, Haley, Sophia, thank you so very much for blessing us. I mean, look, we just scratched the surface here, right? There's so much more to unpack. And luckily for you all on this webinar, we actually have a course called The Business of Culture that launches in April in LA, where we're going to dig way deep into this, taking the knowledge that we have just been blessed with our distinguished panel, and digging into this in far more detail, and going from know why these things are the way they are to know how you apply it to your work on a day-to-day basis. Friends, thank you so very much for being with us. I just feel smarter just being around you all. So thank you so much. And for all those who joined us today, thank you again. And always go blue.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Real pleasure.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Marcus.
Ciao.
Bye.